Welcome to Straight Talk. Well, the people have voted and spoken. Results of local body elections are in. For rural folks, what will the widespread changes mean? Do farmers around the country really have a voice? Have we seen a lurch to the left? And what about Auckland's new superpower, the Super City? Poised for success or failure? The big question, what's it going to mean for our green belts? Today I'm joined by Malcolm Lumsden, former Vice President of Federated Farmers, and Dr Alison Osterman, former rural reporter and now journalism lecturer. Well, Malcolm, what do you make of the local body election results?
I think it's very poor, quite frankly. I think there was a lack of interest, a lack of debate, and I think a lack of good candidates that stood.
But there's been quite varied results around the country, haven't there? There hasn't been a general shift that some people perhaps might have thought there would have been?
Well, in the Waikato we lost two very experienced regional councillors in John Fisher and Frank Healy. That's quite a shame actually, because they did make a good contribution. On the other side, Gary Murfitt in the Manawatu in Horizons got shifted on because of the one plan, and I think the farmers really vented their frustration there.
Right. Alison, what do you make of things? Do you think that farmers did speak up on these issues that obviously were regional in nature in some areas, and they got the changes they wanted?
Well, it's interesting. Canterbury had 4 new mayors, but I did a bit of a research to see how many farmers were standing, and I think I found at least 6 have become mayors, and 4 of those were new. So that's both North and South Island.
So that should be a good representation. What do you think stopped people getting out, farmers in particular, Malcolm, and exercising their right to vote?
I think farmers have had a pretty rough time publicly lately. They're feeling a little bruised. I think there was a lack of clear definition. I think farmers have become despondent that despite the electing councillors to as they see run the councils, the bureaucrats continue to push the line and push the what they want to see achieved, and farmers by and large I think are a little despondent that they don't see the electoral process works in their favour.
What do you think, Alison? Do you think there's evidence of that?
I thought it was very interesting with the Rodney one, which we've discussed before, that the turnout for the northern part of Rodney was very low, and I remember saying that if they want to be represented on the council, they needed to stand.
Right.
Yeah, and they were exactly the people who had some of the largest objections to the Super City and being included. Do you think, Malcolm, perhaps they just thought, oh, it's out of our control, there's nothing we can do about it, why bother voting?
I think there's a lack of leadership in the farming community at the moment. I think there's a lack of debate on the serious issues we face, and I'm absolutely appalled that Federated Farmers lost their non-political stance in the Waikato and supported the rates control team, most of the members who really aren't rural people.
Was that issue-based, or that was just a general swinging support in behind those candidates?
They didn't support their former president, John Fisher, and certainly Frank Healy, who's a good, well-known farmer debater. Goodness knows what they were thinking, frankly.
Right, OK. Alison, one interesting sign is there's a lot more women who have been elected, both onto councils and into positions as mayor. That has to be good, doesn't it?
Yes, I thought it
for
was,
rural
yes,
and urban community alike.
Well, there's the Hamilton, of course, Julie Hardacre, the woman in Queenstown, first woman mayor that they've ever had. And then the lovely story about the council receptionist who became mayor, Claire Barlow, wasn't it?
Which is great, yes. Yeah. So that shows a good sign for the future in terms of positive indications there. Yeah. What issues out there, Malcolm, are still to be resolved in farmers' minds? There's, of course, the Resource Management Act and how that's applied by councils. Is that going to figure large in the next 3-year term of councils?
I think in the Waikato, the settlement on the river is going to have a huge impact, because that's going to remove the ability of the currently elected councillor to set some of the agenda, and that's an issue. But I think by and large issues for farmers are issues of public perception, and that's bearing large in their mind, and given the problems they've had with the weather, that's not what they need at this time.
No. How much can they do about that on a local level? A lot of what you're talking about is really more national driven, isn't it, in terms of television news, images and so forth?
I think that's pretty much out of our control in the national level, because there are people that are running their own agendas. But at a local level, I think farmers have despite the fact we're running bigger farms and are busy and don't have time, we have to make time to be involved in ensuring that the young people in the community get the opportunity to see what goes on farms and become involved in calf clubs and get involved in schools and things like that.
You'd agree with that, Alison?
I do.
Yes.
mean, I lived at Ramarama. We always had calf club. My children all had calves and lambs and baby goats. And as a child, I can remember, I got the champion calf, I seem to remember.
There you go. So yeah, that's credibility in the rural sector.
Maybe, but that connection with the land isn't so strong now.
It's not, no, and it's something that certainly I'll give a bouquet to someone who's doing a lot later. But I have had discussions certainly with John Wilson of Fonterra and that, and I think that we really need to lift the game. We've got no choice. We can't remain isolated on our farms. We have to make sure that we have community support and community understanding.
Is the creation of the super city in Auckland, is that going to help that process or drive a bigger wedge between urban and rural?
Well, I think the difficulty with the super city is that it has a huge hunger for resources, and I think it's going to take a very strong government to resist the urge to become politically favourites in the city of Auckland. The rural community doesn't have the resources at the moment. In fact, there's very few large farmers will be paying income tax this year, and I think that the country doesn't really understand the difficulties that the farming community is in commercial sense.
Right. Now, Alison, what about the vexed issue of continual expansion of Auckland, the hunger for resources that Malcolm's talking about, more urban and business development, perhaps at the expense of green belts? How do you see this playing out?
Well, I'm very cynical about Franklin, for example, because I lived there for some time. And I remember in the early days, they said, Franklin, we'll keep it green. And now, this is historic, of course, because in the 1860s, they subdivided Franklin into 5 and 10 acre blocks. So, of course, they're just reverting, which I think, but the Waitakere Ranges, they're very concerned that the development will move into the ranges. At the moment it's protected, but there's big fights with developers to move into some of those precious areas that need to be preserved.
And it did show up, didn't it, in the results that largely the Franklin area was quite happy with the status quo in terms of quite a strong vote for John Banks there.
I thought that was very interesting because the media would tell you that citizens and ratepayers had fallen apart, but in Franklin, I think they won most of the seats. Right. I think they won all but 2 on the local board. So I thought that was a very strong showing.
Yeah, right. Malcolm, what do you think about this whole issue of urban expansion? Where's it going to stop?
Well, you know, years ago I missed the opportunity of a wonderful photograph, and that was standing on a hill just outside Hamilton. And you were looking at the green pasture with the cows standing in it, and you turned around and there was the land being torn up for subdivision. And I would have always liked to have done that. You know, farmers are destroying the country. Yeah, right. And I think that we tend to build our cities on the most elite soils in the country, and we're squandering those resources. I think we need a fresh approach and a new approach and a new understanding.
Right. And Alison, you would think that would be a good idea. How do you best see that being sort of played out? There needs to be a consensus approach, doesn't there? Driven probably from a national level.
I think so. Yes, I see. Do they go north or do they go south? My father always said go north because the land wasn't as good.
That's right, yeah.
And you know, the southern land is much more fertile and productive.
Yeah. But Auckland in the past has gone, north,
it's gone everywhere.
south, west, hasn't gone east because it can't. But that's about the limit of it, isn't it, Malcolm?
Well, Auckland's a very expansive city. I think in terms of population size, it has one of the largest land areas in the world. And I don't think we can afford that luxury. For the foreseeable future, we're going to be an agricultural producing land, and we need to preserve those elite soils for that purpose.
Well, we'll look to see what happens there. Coming up after the break, more foreign companies get the green light to buy up some big South Island dairy operations. And farmers will soon be able to buy an environmentally friendly diesel additive designed right here in New Zealand. Will it benefit our clean green image? Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Now it's on to You Said It, hot topics in the media spotlight we need to delve into. Well, Malcolm, foreign land ownership. There's been approval from the Overseas Investment Office for Synlay's partner, Bright Dairies, to come in, also for Harvard to buy some large dairy farms down south. What do you make of this issue?
I'm appalled because I stood for Federated Farmers many years ago on the basis that we could afford to be emotional about land issues. I'm very much opposed to the selling of land to those people from those countries where we don't have the same rights. For example, you cannot buy land in China, you cannot own land in Japan and much of Asia. I think we're selling our future because the people who own land, who live overseas, who are not New Zealand citizens, don't have the same interest in what comes about.
Right, so you'd be fully in support of Federated Farmers policy at present, which relates to that whole thing of being able to own land overseas in countries where their citizens might want to come here and do the same thing.
Yeah, I don't have any problem if a genuine farmer like our Irish farmers or our American farmers come here because we can do the same there. But I have a problem where corporate ownership of land and particularly pension funds taking bolt holes in land which may not be in the interest of New Zealand's agricultural future.
Right. What do you think, Alison? What about the appearance of the Save the Farms group and their advertisements in national papers?
Yes,
what do you make of that?
They're doing well, they seem to be very prolific with their advertising,
and
don't
they've
they?
tapped into local sentiment, haven't they?
I think so.
Yes.
And we talked about that it is an emotional issue. But I do think the other side of the coin is that the land has to be affordable for New Zealanders to buy it. So I don't know how you deal with that.
Because there is a lack of equity out there at the moment, isn't there, Malcolm? Which is meaning that farmers who are wanting to sell their properties, they're sometimes delighted if an overseas buyer comes along.
Well, that's the hype. The reality is that New Zealand has hyped up the land prices beyond their productive capacity. And in fact, it's very difficult to sit down with a pen and paper today and look at the prices that's being asked for land and make an economic decision. It's just not right. And at some stage, we have to take a hit. And unless we get land prices back to its productive level, then we're going to be in trouble for a long time.
So some of the sort of speculative talk, particularly around the dairy industry, that's driven the prices to that unsustainable level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
so how do we turn off the tap there?
Well, it's going to be pain. And I think that it's going to be pain for a long time. But certainly if you're a smart businessman and you look at investing in land for productive reasons, for a return on capital, it's just not there at the moment.
Right. Okay.
I've a friend of my father's years ago, he was an importer in Auckland, said that he believed that farmers were overcapitalised, and that was way back, 50 years ago. So
it's
nothing's
just
much
continued on
changed,
from
has
there.
it?
No. Okay. Well, moving on.